Today we're talking about the Algebra 2 exam review, and we're looking at Unit 1, Factor Master, the place where we started the school year off with. And the first problem, x cubed plus 3x squared minus 5x minus 15, first thing that we need to notice is that there's 4 terms. And so the method that we're going to use on here is we're going to factor by grouping. And when we start this off, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the first 2 terms as a group, and we're going to look at the last 2 terms as a group, and then we're going to factor the greatest common factor from there. In our first group, our GCF is x squared, the smallest exponent between those two. When we factor out an x squared, we're left with x plus 3. X cubed divided by x squared gives us 1x. We had 3 x's, we took out 2, we have 1. In the second term, 3x squared divided by x squared is 3. We had 2 x's, we took them both out. We don't need an x again. Minus, and be really careful with this second group here, because when we factor out the greatest common factor, not only is it the 5, but we need to watch out for the fact that it's minus 5x. To figure out what goes in this parentheses, we're going to take negative 5x divided by negative 5, which is positive x. Negative 15 divided by negative 5 is positive 3. And now what we see in our groups here is that we have x plus 3 from each group. And then we're left with, in the single terms from each group, the x squared and the minus 5. By the way, if you happen to write x squared minus 5 first and x plus 3 second, that is fine. That is allowed. When we look at problem number 2, x squared plus 25, we need to remember in terms of factoring that there is a situation where we can't factor. And in this case, it happens to be one of them because we have a plus in here. And in order to be able to factor this, we need to have minus. It would be the difference between 2 squares. Because it's not minus, we cannot do anything to that problem, except for right drawing. Problem number 3. 8x squared plus 15x minus 2. By the way, I haven't said it on the previous 2, but we should always be checking for greatest common factor first. Do we have a greatest common factor in these problems? And as we took a look at problem number 3, we don't have a greatest common factor. But what we do see here is that there are 3 terms. 8x squared is a term, and 15x is a term, and 2 is a term. And oftentimes, then, when we have 3 terms, our method is going to be to split the middle. So when we split the middle, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this 8, we're going to multiply it by the 2. Don't worry about the sign yet. 8 times 2 is 16. And the factors of 16 are 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4. And ask yourselves, will any of those terms combine to be 15? And what I mean by the combine is, will they add or subtract to be 15? Well, there's only one place that that's going to happen. Here it's the 1 and the 16. And what we have here, in order to get 16, we're going to have to say negative 1 plus 16. So when we simplify this here, or when we put it back into our problem, we are going to have 8x squared plus, minus 1x plus 16x minus 2. So we split that 15x into negative 1x plus 16x. And now this goes back to what we did in problem number 1. We're going to group the first 2, and we're going to group the last 2. And we're going to factor our greatest common factor. In our first group, our only common factor is an x. When we factor that out, we're left with 8x minus 1, and yes, you need to write the 1. Over here in the second group, plus, which is different from what we had here earlier on problem number 1. But our greatest common factor in the second group is 2. And when we factor that out, 16x divided by 2 is 8x. 2 divided by 2 is 1. In fact, it's negative 2 divided by 2, which is negative 1. And now we can finish this problem because we have an 8x minus 1 in each group. And then we have an x plus 2, our singles that are left over from our grouping. The x in front of the 8x minus 1, the 2 in front of the 8x minus 1. Number 4, our method is going to be the cubed method on this particular problem. One of the clues to the fact that we are factoring a cube in this problem is that we see an x cubed in there. A couple other things that we can remember is that 27 is 3 times 3 times 3. And 125 is 5 times 5 times 5. So when we factor this, the method that some of the Algebra 2 teachers use is the SOAP method. So first of all, what we do is we're going to turn this into a binomial and a trinomial. Binomial means 2 terms, trinomial means 3 terms. We're going to take the cubed root of 27. Again, 27 is 3 times 3 times 3. The cubed root of 27 is 3. The cubed root of x cubed is x. And the cubed root of 125 is 5. Well, here's where the SOAP comes in. SOAP stands for same sign, opposite sign, always positive. So first of all, the sign in the problem is a minus. 27x cubed minus 125. There's the same sign. Next, our next sign is going to have the opposite of the minus sign, which is going to be a positive. We put it right here. And the last sign in the problem is always positive. Now we have our signs, so we don't have to worry about the signs anymore. So we'll go back here, and to figure out the first term, we're going to take 27x cubed divided by 3x. 27 divided by 3 is 9. X cubed divided by x is x squared. Going to go to the very last term. 125 divided by 5 is 25. And you may need to type that in your calculator, and that's okay. And remember, our signs are already in the problem. So to finish, to get that middle term, what we're going to do is we're going to take the 3x that we found originally times the 5 that we found originally, and we're going to multiply those two together. 3x times 5 is 15x. And there we've factored a cube. Number 5. It looks remarkably similar to problem number 2. But here in this problem, we actually do have a minus sign. And therefore, we can factor. This is the difference between squares. And when we factor, we're going to do 2 parentheses here. And x squared is x times x. And 64 is 8 times 8. What you may notice and remember is that the square root of x squared is x. And the square root of 64 is 8. The only thing that needs to happen now is that we're going to make one of the parentheses a negative and the other positive. If you choose to write x plus 8 first and x minus 8 second, that's fine. Difference between the two squares. Number 6. Once again, I'll point out that there's 3 terms in this problem. And we've actually seen one already with the 3 terms. And we're going to split the middle. Remember that the number in front of the x squared term is 1. We're going to take 1 times negative 32, which is 32. Sorry, we don't want to take the sign. It's just 1 times 32. We'll put the signs in a moment. And let's list all the factors of 32, which are 1 times 32, 2 times 16, and 4 times 8. And once again, will any of those combine to be 14? Either adding to be 14 or subtracting to be 14. And the place that we can get those to work out for us is right here with the 2 and the 16. It needs to end up to be positive 14, so it's going to be positive 16 and negative 2. And now what happens is, when we write this down, we've got x squared, and it's going to be minus 2x plus 16x minus 32. And here again, we're going to factor by grouping. So we're going to have the first two terms grouped together, the second two terms grouped together, and we're going to factor out a greatest common factor. We have x as our greatest common factor, and then we're left with x minus 2. By the way, once again, it's the smallest exponent that determines what the value of our exponent is going to be on our greatest common factor. And over here, it's going to be 16. 16x divided by 16 is x. 32 divided by 16 is 2. And once again, we're fortunate because what we see is that we have an x minus 2 in the first group and then x minus 2 in the second group. So x minus 2 is going to be one of our factors, and then what's left in our problem? The x plus the 16. By the way, I haven't said it, you can FOIL out these problems, except on problem number 4, but you can FOIL this out and check your work. Do you end up with the problem that we started with here when you FOIL these problems, or do the distributive property, the double distributive property on these two parentheses? Problem number 7, multiple choice question, but we just want you to be aware that the exam is going to have some multiple choice on it, and it's going to have some free response on it. So we want you to be prepared for anything. And I said it on problem number 3, and then I didn't say it again, but what we should always be doing is we should be asking ourselves, do we have a greatest common factor? And as we look at this problem here, it does look like we have a greatest common factor, because 12 and 30 have this value of 6 that's in both of them. So let's factor out a 6. We were just talking about on the last problem, between x squared and x, our greatest common factor is going to be the smallest exponent, so x to the first power. Between y and y squared, our smallest exponent is a y. So we're going to have a greatest common factor of 6xy. And by the way, then, multiple choice, remember, means that we can, right now, narrow this down to answers A and B. Well, to figure out what's going to go in here, we're going to take 12 divided by 6 is 2. And then we're going to take x squared divided by x is x. We already took out our y, so it's 2x. So now we can tell that the answer here is going to be A. But let's just check. Does 30 divided by 6 equal 5? Yes. And then we already took out the x's. Y squared divided by y does equal y. Factoring the greatest common factor. As we flip our page, and we look at the last problem in our factoring review, 25x squared minus 49. Well, we've recently seen a problem, and in fact, if you think about it, number 2 we thought might be this problem, then number 5 actually was a difference between two squares, as this one is also. And when we look at this, what we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of 25. And the square root of 25 is 5. Take the square root of x squared. It's x. Take the square root of 49, which is 7. And we're going to have those same values in both parentheses. And the only other difference here is that we need to have different signs in these parentheses. So once we factor, then we can go back and look here to see that our answer is definitely not prime. And on C, they both have negatives, so it's not that. And A, they both have positives. So on problem B, they have a positive 7 plus 7, and then we have a minus 7. And I have it in a different order, but it is, in fact, the answer B.